Hello and welcome to this Block Daemon hosted webinar focusing on Ethereum's upcoming Pectra upgrade. And with us today is Julia Schmidt, blockchain engineer at Alluvial, and Freddie Zwanzger, Block Daemon's Ethereum ecosystem lead, to discuss how Pectra's changes will impact ETH staking, the network as a whole, liquid staking services, and more. So Freddie and Julia, thanks for joining today. To kick things off, Freddie, with yourself, could you give us a brief overview of Pectra, the upgrade, and what its impact on stakers will be?
Right. So Pectra is an Ethereum upgrade that is scheduled for late Q1 2025, so about March. Might shift a little bit to the back, or maybe April or so. But and it was actually supposed to be a small fork in the beginning, and then more and more things got added. So they actually divided into two now. But so the first part, it contains a lot of things like, for example, with regards to smart accounts, account abstraction, and things like that. But I want to focus really on the things that are relevant to our audience in terms of the staking changes. And there's really mainly two big ones, right? One is the fact that you can trigger withdrawals and exits from your validator via the execution layer, so the withdrawal credentials. Decreasing or basically eliminating the dependency on the node operator. And then the second big one, arguably even bigger in the effect, is that the maximum effective balance of a validator can now change. It used to be only 32 ETH as a fixed amount, and now it can be anywhere between 32 and 2048. So those are the most important ones. There's a smaller one which basically leads to the fact that the deposits are much quicker on-chain registered, from like 14 hours to less than an hour. But that's just a minor point. So those two, I think, are the ones mostly relevant for our discussion here.
And in terms of timelines then, I know you mentioned Q1 next year, Freddie, but in terms of the activation queues, exit queues, post-Pectra, what are they expected to be like? And also, will there be any changes to validator infrastructure that we use today?
Right. So all of the changes that I mentioned are opt-in. So they're in addition to the existing processes and rules. You can still have the old validator types of 32 increments and those things. And a lot of things really also don't change. For example, the capacity of the activation and exit queue, it's just now measured in Ethereum staked rather than a number of validators, but the capacity itself is calculated that it stays exactly the same. The same goes mainly, and we can dive into that later, with the rewards. So the infrastructure stays the same. You can consolidate your existing validators in place. So if you don't want to change something, you don't need to change something. That's the good news. But the fork will give you additional options to choose from, which might be pretty exciting, particularly with regards to auto compounding.
And for the first major change, Freddie, that you mentioned, Julia, I'd like to get your opinion on the execution layer triggerable withdrawals, which is EIP 7002. And just explain to us maybe how the process post-Pectra will change versus the current ways that withdrawals are initiated in Ethereum's current staking ecosystem.
Yeah, hi. So to propose and attest blocks, the validator needs to be constantly online and have a stake balance of 32 ETH. And when you want to set up a validator to take part in the consensus mechanism, you would have to set up two keys. One is the validator key, which is used to perform the validator duties, sign the block attestations, and then secondly is the withdrawal key. And the withdrawal key is kind of represents the ownership of the staked ETH. And so then you have two ways of obviously staking. You can do solo staking or multi-custodial setups, such as with Block Daemon, and as we are doing at Liquid Collective, where you can choose your node operator to do all the validator duties and the validator operations on your behalf. And that kind of gives them the validator key, and you only end up having access to the withdrawal key. The withdrawal key is where all the rewards will automatically be sent to, and where the staked amount, the initial staked amount, will be transferred back to you when you exit the validator. but the actual message to exit a validator can only be sent from this validator key that is controlled by the node operator. And so that requires you to trust your node operator and to kind of depend on them, to ring them up and call them and say, hey, can you please exit my validator for me? And if they actually do it, that's great. But you always have to rely on this third party to follow that guidance. And so what's been happening in the space previously was that you would agree to pre-signed exit messages when you set up this multi-custodial staking setup, and then you would get given a message that you could use later on to exit your validator. But you would not know whether the exit message would actually work. And every time there was an upgrade in Ethereum, that would kind of change the version number, and that might have the effect that your exit message wouldn't work anymore. And so in the last Cancun upgrade, what people did was there was a new EIP that would kind of change the expiry time on these exit messages. So this is kind of just treating the symptom, but it's not solving the problem, which is actually that the owner of the stake ETH can't trigger the withdrawal, and the validator exit, and so the funds can be held hostage by the node operator. And this is now solved with EIP 7002, which now allows both the validator key, as we currently have it, and the withdrawal key to trigger the exits from the execution layer, simply by sending a transaction to a special contract, a special withdrawal contract, where you send a withdrawal request and specify either a full exit of the validator, or you can now withdraw partial amounts from the stake balance, and that will come in handy with the other EIP that Freddie will introduce to us.
Yeah, and on the topic of that EIP, Freddie, the changes to the max effective balance that people can stake to are increasing. So could you give us a bit of an overview of the, max effective balance going forwards from Pectra onwards, and how is this going to impact people who currently stake, maybe new to staking, and then overall, what is the network implications in terms of performance?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do that in a second. Just for the last part, just to add in terms of for our institutional customers, this dependency on the node operator was usually addressed sort of with those pre-signed exit messages, like Julia said. And it was to address the concern mainly of regulators or business continuity concerns of the compliance departments of those larger banks, etc., that needed to solve that. And also they had to struggle with keeping those exit messages safe and whatnot. So there's a clear simplification of the process, basically, and eliminating that dependency. And that's great, particularly for the institutional customers, and also actually for the liquid staking protocols like the Liquid Collective and etc., that has a better control over their node operators. So any protocol, whether that's Lido, Rocket Pool, or Liquid Collective, now has the opportunity to make quicker reactions, basically, and changes to their node operator. So I think that's another benefit. But now coming back to your question about increasing the max effective balance. So like I said, a lot of things don't change, and all of this is opt-in. So you don't have to change anything. And even if you do switch to the new validator type, most things will stay the same. So mainly the rewards, mainly the activation, exit queues, things like that. The infrastructure stays pretty much the same. Basically, let's first start with the goal of this. So the Ethereum core developers and the ecosystem at large wants to introduce this to reduce the amount of validators on the network, because we are over 1 million validators now, and each of those validators has to communicate with the other about attestation and the consensus and all of these things. So that's a lot of network traffic, and there has been tests that once we reach like 200 million validators, for example, that could be a problem. And also some items on the roadmap in the future will depend on having a much lower number of validators. So that's the goal, to reduce the number of validators without impacting the security of the network, because the amount of ETH staked would stay constant, right? It's just more ETH per validator, basically, on average. So that's one thing. That's the goal. For the customer, what it means mainly is they need to make a decision on whether they want to use the new one or the old one. And this mainly depends on their liquidity needs. Because in the current setup with the 32 ETH validators, your protocol rewards will be pushed to your withdrawal credential every 9 or 10 days, depending on the number of validators. So you regularly receive some ETH that you, for example, can use for redemptions, or depending on if your sort of agreement with the customers to, in ETF or other financial product is to basically hand over those rewards, then you would need this regular liquidity. But many setups also basically assume that the customer funds are used to compound the stake in order to benefit from the, basically APY versus APR kind of benefit. So if you're thinking of in the past when you were compounding and you had, let's say, 10 validators of 32 ETH, and then every year or so you'd have enough rewards, let's say 32 ETH, and then you could launch a new validator and therefore like manually compound it. And so that's you could do it, but it's a manual process, and it takes time, is a bit cumbersome. And with the new validator, you would auto compound your rewards. So that's great. That's equals basically more rewards and less work. So that's great. Now, there's always a trade-off, and the trade-off in this case is that you don't get these rewards regularly, but you need to set up a process in order to retrieve those rewards, or to reduce your balance. If you just want to go from, let's say you have 1,000 validators on 1,000 ETH on that validator, and you need 500 ETH for whatever reason, and then you would trigger one of those withdrawals, like Julia explained in the other side. You can do that yourself now without the node operator and say like, okay, I want to withdraw 500 ETH off that validator. And that is a regular transaction, and that incurs a gas fee, rather than in the old model, you receive your rewards for free. And you obviously need to establish some sort of balance management process, and someone needs to be responsible for that and monitor that. And so it's basically the additional rewards versus the additional work that you need to put in, and potentially some gas fees. So it's really coming down to the fact, like, what are you right now using your rewards for? Do you actually need them liquid, or can you compound them? How often do you need to change your balance, or how often does your collateral change? Like if you're thinking about, let's say, a staking ETF, for example, how often is inflows and outflows, and can you match them maybe off chain, and keep the amount of ETH rather constant, or just increase it? Then you can actually also top up a validator up to those 2048 ETH. And maybe just as a side note, once the validator has reached this maximum of 2048 ETH, it will actually behave like the old 32 ETH validator, because it has reached the max effective balance. And then any rewards above that would be swept out to that withdrawal credential. So in that sense, it's really, it sounds like a minor change, but when you dig into the details, it is a little bit more tricky to find the best setup. You can also do a combination of different ones. There's some implications on the slashing probabilities, but there's good news as well, because the initial slashing penalty will go down dramatically by, I believe, a factor of 128x or something. So initially, right now, it would be with a 32 ETH validator, the initial penalty for slashing would be 1 ETH. Now, obviously, slashing is a rare event anyway, but now with Pectra, it will become really, really cheap, because it'll be a fraction of an ETH, like $20 or maybe 25 now. Prices have been going up, but so really it won't be a super significant amount anymore, which again, as this whole change also has a positive side effects on solo staking, which is obviously important for the credible neutrality of Ethereum. So they don't have to worry about slashing anymore. Our institutional customers were always covered by our slashing guarantee anyway. But that slashing is less of a concern. And this auto compounding benefit obviously is also mainly benefiting smaller amounts of stake, right? Because if you have 1,000 validators, you could basically launch a new validator manually every month or so. So you're compounding the rewards was a manual process, but you could do it quite easily. But if you have like only one validator, you practically need to wait 32 years to launch a new one from your rewards. So that effect is there. And I'll leave it at that. There's a lot of nuance in terms of the auto compounding. There's like, it's not directly auto compounding because the effective balance is not exactly like the actual balance on the validator and things like that. But we'll provide more guidance and models for customers in the future to make that decision and to basically find out the best way for them.
And then on the impact of max effective balance on liquidity and liquid staking solutions, Julia, I would just like to get your opinion into, I suppose, how the consolidation of larger validators compares to the benefits of liquid staking, and obviously with liquid staking offering staking to an arbitrary amount and also auto compounding. How will these two decisions weigh up in a staker's mind when choosing post Pectra to stake, consolidating their stake into one validator versus a liquid staking solution? Maybe some insights there.
Yeah, so at Alluvial, we have also been closely following these changes, and we would like to incorporate and offer both solutions to our client base, so that if they desire to run larger validators, they can do so, and the consolidation requests that are currently being offered in Pectra are kind of an interim solution, which shouldn't affect the actual time your effective balance is not earning rewards, because it won't have to go through an activation queue again when you're consolidating multiple validators all together. So the process is quite smooth, and as Freddie has been mentioning, the fact that the initial slashing penalty has been lowered, of course, lowers the risk for running more high balance validator. So the push from the Ethereum Foundation is really to consolidate as much as we can to reduce the load on the network congestion. And so we're trying to support this change. Obviously, there's a small disadvantage that we haven't mentioned yet, that in the very rare case that a validator would get slashed, and it would be a max effective balance validator of 2048 ETH, then that validator would obviously go into the exit queue, and your funds would be kind of locked there for a longer time, and it would be like 64 validators getting slashed at once if such a big one was hit. So we would try to offer flexible kind of max effective balance, flexible validator ceilings according to the client's risk appetite. That's kind of the plan going forward.
And then on the utility side, what advantages do liquid staking tokens still offer, particularly around participation in DeFi, orchestration across operators, compared to the traditional staking that is changing with Pectra?
To me, so because obviously in the Liquid Collective protocol, we wouldn't just offer staking to one node operator, but we actually have a consortium of different node operators that we would kind of in a round robin approach allocate the stakes to. So that kind of increases the centralization risk of the staked ETH. And then all these node operators would follow the North standard, which is the node operator risk standard. So we kind of also guarantee a coverage fund in case of slashing. There's also an infrastructure in place. So that's a key advantage of using the liquid staking protocol, of that you have this diversification of your staked ETH across multiple node operators. And obviously, a key advance I haven't touched upon yet in the partial withdrawals is that surely now that you can withdraw your staked ETH from the execution layer, this kind of opens up a new avenue for protocols such as EigenLayer to actually trigger withdrawals from the EigenLayer that would exit a validator from that. So there's a huge kind of increase in functionality and interoperability that DeFi can now better incorporate the full validator lifecycle from the deposit to the exit. So for me as a blockchain engineer, it's exciting to be able to automate the full workflow.
Yeah,
And Freddie,
exactly. I think I'm just going to add to that a little bit, because that what Julia was saying on the smart contract automation options, I think we will see a lot more on that. And basically, we as Blockdaemon are obviously a proud node operator following the Norse standard to the highest level with the Liquid Collective. So as a Blockdaemon customer, basically the customer can choose whether they want to go for those liquid staking benefits. And obviously the main one is the liquidity, which basically allows someone to stake a higher percentage, right? What we see is that those financial institutions, they would typically stake between, let's say, 65 and 85% of their ETH under custody or under management. Because they need the rest sort of as a liquidity buffer for redemptions. And with liquid staking, you can potentially increase the amount of ETH staked, which obviously then generates higher rewards. And gives them a competitive advantage. So actually combining the two is also possible. So I think there's still absolutely valid use cases for using liquid staking. As much as there are for traditional staking. And it's just that I guess both sides of this benefit from Pectra, because the liquid staking get the execution layer withdrawals option, and the traditional staking get the elimination of this 32 increment validator potential problem, particularly for smaller stakes. Let's say if you have 100 ETH, you have like 3 validators and then some leftovers, and that's obviously not ideal. Or even 50 ETH would be even more, because like almost 50% of your ETH is not staked. So that's a great benefit for traditional staking, as well as the auto compounding, obviously.
Can I also add to the advantage of a liquid staking token is obviously adding to the liquidity that you mentioned, is that even when you can now partially withdraw part of the staked ETH balance from the validator, that won't be an instant one transaction. You submit the transaction, then it will get queued to a withdrawal request queue, then it will eventually get included in a block. And when it's included in the block, then there's still the exit epoch and the withdrawal epoch that will be calculated. So there will be a delay. It won't be like instant liquidity. So that's why the liquid staking token, in addition to obviously offering other leveraging opportunities in DeFi, it's also like the instant liquidity that these partial withdrawals still can't offer.
So Julia, to, I suppose, point listeners and watchers in the direction of any resources or calls to action that they may have coming away from this discussion, where can people go to learn more about the Liquid Collective and also Alluvial?
Yeah, so you can follow Alluvial and the Liquid Collective on Twitter, on X, on LinkedIn, or on the Alluvial website. We'll be sharing an article more detailing the changes regarding the Pectra upgrade. We'll touch upon the other changes that we haven't mentioned yet and how they will affect the Ethereum landscape. And yeah.
Great stuff. And Freddie, for yourself, any updates to be shared in the future regarding Pectra? Anything that listeners or watchers should be aware of as well?
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot to come, basically. We're going to have a dedicated page on our website, blockdaemon.com. And this will contain, that will be sort of the central hub of all the resources. We'll have a blog post, we'll have an FAQ, we'll have some guidance, maybe modeling recommendations with regards to what type of validator to choose or what size of the new type to choose, whether you want like 2,000 ETH validator or 2 with 2,000 or 4 with 500. All these are generally possible, and there's some trade-off decisions to be made. And we will obviously help our customers navigate through this. So watch blockdaemon.com, or you can also follow us on at blockdaemonhq on Twitter, obviously, also LinkedIn. So all of these, but really the central resource page will be on the website. And this will include a lot more detailed information. And then obviously, as we incorporate all these options into our various channels, the staking API, the Blockdaemon app, that will be also in our docs reflected. But find everything on blockdaemon.com.
Fantastic. Freddie, Julia, many thanks for your time today. Fascinating discussion and a great Pectra primer. for everyone watching today. Thank you very much.